The light from the street lamp outside the cafe cast a pale, liquid gold across the glossy cover of the magazine. For most people walking by on the bustling city street, it was just another issue of Forbes, its bold, white-on-red masthead a familiar symbol of ambition and success. But for Chloe, standing frozen on the rain-slicked pavement, it was an impossibility, a glitch in the fabric of her carefully constructed reality. Her breath hitched, fogging the cold glass of the newsstand window. It couldn't be. It was a trick of the light, a cruel joke played by her own mind. She squinted, leaning closer, her manicured nails pressing into the damp sill. But the face staring back at her remained stubbornly, infuriatingly the same. It was him. Liam. His hair was shorter, styled with a precision he'd never bothered with when they were married. A few distinguished threads of silver now graced his temples, framing a face that was leaner, sharper. The soft, accommodating lines she had known were gone, replaced by an unnerving confidence. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit, a stark contrast to the worn corduroys and faded polo shirts she remembered with a shudder of distaste. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the same deep blue, but the familiar, gentle warmth had been forged into something else entirely, something clear, focused, and powerful. Beneath his image, in stark, uncompromising letters, was the headline, "The Quiet Architect: How Liam Sterling Redesigned the Urban Future and Built a Billion-Dollar Firm from the Ground Up." A wave of vertigo washed over Chloe. Billion-dollar firm. It was a number so large, so abstract, it felt like a physical blow. This was the man she had left 3 years ago. The man she had systematically dismantled in a sterile courtroom, stripping him of his home, his savings, his dignity. The man she and her new husband, Marcus, had laughed about. The cautionary tale of a dreamer who couldn't grasp reality. The man she had last seen serving drinks at a cocktail party, his face a mask of quiet humiliation. That man on the cover of Forbes. The world tilted on its axis, and the triumphant narrative of her own life suddenly felt like a cheap, flimsy lie. What they didn't know, what she had been so arrogantly certain of, was that his humility was not weakness, but a shield. And behind that shield, he had been building an empire, brick by silent brick. We're about to dive into this story of betrayal, patience, and ultimate vindication. I'm so glad you're here with me for this journey. If you enjoy stories where true worth wins out in the end, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. And just for fun, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's get back to the beginning of the end. 3 years earlier, the world had been a much colder, more confined place. It was the color of brushed steel and the scent of expensive antiseptic cleaner. The conference room at the law firm of Croft, Miller, and Thorne was designed to communicate power and finality. A single, monolithic slab of polished mahogany served as the table. So reflective, Chloe could see a distorted, elongated version of her own triumphant smile. Across from her, Liam sat perfectly still. He wasn't looking at her or at her lawyer, a shark in a tailored suit named Mr. Croft. He wasn't even looking at his own court-appointed legal aid, a young, overwhelmed woman who kept shuffling papers as if the right sequence could somehow change the outcome. Instead, Liam's gaze was fixed on the city skyline, visible through the floor-to-ceiling window. He was watching the distant dance of construction cranes, his face a study in unnerving calm. "So, we are in agreement," Mr. Croft said, his voice smooth and final, like gravel being poured over a grave. He slid a thick stack of documents across the glossy table. "Mr. Sterling relinquishes all claims to the marital home on Crescent Drive, its contents, the joint savings account, the investment portfolio, and the vehicle. In return, Mrs. Sterling, soon to be Miss Vance again, graciously agrees not to pursue further action regarding the failed architectural consultancy, which, as we have established, drained significant marital assets. The phrase failed architectural consultancy was a deliberate barb, sharpened and aimed by Chloe herself. It had never been a failure. It had been a dream, one Liam had been meticulously building before they even met. But in the narrative of their divorce, it had been recast as a reckless folly, a financial black hole that justified her claim to everything else. Liam's lawyer flinched. Now see here, the consultancy was showing promise. Was it? Chloe interrupted, her voice sweet as poison. She leaned forward, placing her hands flat on the table. Liam, tell them. Tell them about the big municipal contract you were so sure you were going to get. The one that was going to be our future. What happened with that? Liam's gaze slowly detached from the window and settled on her. There was no anger in his eyes, no pain, just a quiet, unnerving clarity, as if he were an anthropologist observing a strange and predictable ritual. They gave it to a larger, more established firm, he said, his voice even, the one your father sits on the board of. A flicker of annoyance crossed Chloe's face. The truth was always so inconvenient. Nepotism is a nasty accusation, Liam. The simple fact is, you were out of your league. You always were. You had these grand designs, these beautiful little drawings, but you never understood power. You never understood how the world actually works. She gestured to the papers. This is how it works. Sign the papers. Beside her, her mother, Eleanor Vance, gave a subtle, approving nod. Eleanor was a woman carved from ice, her entire existence a testament to the importance of marrying well and maintaining appearances. She had never approved of Liam, a man who worked with his hands and his mind, but had no ancestral wealth to speak of. His passion for architecture, which Chloe had once found romantic, Eleanor saw as a quaint but unprofitable hobby. Throughout the proceedings, she had been a silent, formidable presence, her disappointment in her daughter's initial choice of husband radiating from her like a palpable chill. Liam's lawyer whispered to him, her voice tight with frustration. We can fight this. The clause about the consultancy is punitive. We can argue for a more equitable division. Liam gave a slow, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He reached into the inside pocket of his worn tweed jacket, and his fingers brushed against a familiar object. It was a small, 6-inch architect's scale ruler made of smooth, aged plastic. It had been a gift from his first mentor, a man who had told him, measure twice, cut once, in buildings and in life. He had carried it for 15 years. It was a link to who he was, a quiet anchor in the storm of what was happening to him. His fingers tightened around it, the sharp edges pressing into his palm. He looked at Chloe, at her smug, confident face, and at her mother's cold satisfaction. He saw the gleam of victory in her lawyer's eyes. They thought they were winning. They thought they were taking everything. They were measuring his worth in square footage and stock certificates. They had no idea how to measure the man himself. It's fine, Liam said, his voice resonating with a quiet authority that made everyone at the table, even Mr. Croft, pause for a fraction of a second. He pulled his hand from his pocket, leaving the ruler behind, and reached for the pen. It's just a house. It's just money. He uncapped the pen, the click echoing in the silent room. You can't take anything that truly matters. He signed the first page. His signature was not the scrawl of a defeated man. It was fluid, precise, the signature of an architect inking a final design. He pushed the document back across the table. I wish you the life you deserve, Chloe, he said. The words were simple, delivered without a trace of sarcasm, and yet they hung in the air with the weight of a prophecy. Chloe felt a brief, inexplicable shiver, a ghost of a doubt, but she dismissed it as she watched him stand up, give a polite nod to the room, and walk out of the conference room, leaving the life they had built behind him without a single backward glance. He didn't look broken. He looked free, and that, more than anything, was what she could not stand. She had won. She had taken everything. So why did it feel like she had just lost something essential, something she couldn't even name? The weeks following the finalization of the divorce bled into one another in a haze of gray monotony for Liam. He moved into a small, one-bedroom apartment in a less fashionable part of the city, a place with aging pipes and a view of a brick wall. The contrast with the sprawling, light-filled house on Crescent Drive was stark, a daily, physical reminder of his fall from grace in the eyes of the world, and in the eyes of the woman he had once loved. The house, their home, had been more than just a structure of wood and plaster to him. It had been a canvas. He'd spent years sketching renovations, imagining how he could open up the kitchen to the garden, how a skylight in the master bedroom could catch the morning sun just so. These were not just idle dreams. They were blueprints of a shared future. Plans he had lovingly laid out for Chloe, who had smiled and called them wonderful, all the while seeing them not as a home, but as an asset to be appraised and eventually liquidated. Now his world was confined to 400 square feet. The grand spaces he designed in his mind had shrunk to the dimensions of a single room that served as his living area, dining room, and office. Yet strangely, he did not feel confined. After the initial shock, a profound sense of quiet descended upon him. The constant, low-level hum of Chloe's expectations, the pressure to network at tedious parties, the subtle condescension from her family and friends. It was all gone. The silence was vast, and in it, he could finally hear himself think. He spent his days in a simple, disciplined routine. He would wake with the dawn, run along the industrial canal that snaked through his neighborhood, and then return to his apartment. He would sit at a simple wooden desk he'd bought secondhand, the surface already scarred with the nicks and cuts of previous owners, and he would work. He had his computer, a high-powered machine he had managed to keep, arguing it was an essential tool of his trade and had been purchased before the bulk of their joint assets were merged. Chloe had let it go with a dismissive wave, as if allowing him to keep his toy. She had no idea that the machine held his life's work, not just the failed bids and old projects, but the beginnings of something new, something revolutionary. He would spend hours staring at digital blueprints, manipulating complex 3D models of structures that seemed to defy gravity. He was not just designing buildings, he was designing systems, self-sustaining urban ecosystems that integrated green space, water reclamation, and energy generation into the very fabric of the architecture. It was the work he had tried to explain to Chloe, the vision he had been so passionate about. She had called it his utopian nonsense and told him that real clients wanted marble lobbies and impressive facades, not complicated, expensive theories about sustainability. "People want to be impressed, Liam," she had said one evening, looking over his shoulder at a complex schematic. "They don't want to be lectured about their carbon footprint. This is just academic. It's not business." Now, free from that narrow definition of success, he dove into his work with a singular focus he hadn't felt in years. He filled notebooks with equations, sketches, and logistical plans. He was in contact with a small, trusted circle of colleagues from his university days, engineers, environmental scientists, and urban planners who shared his vision. And most importantly, he was in regular contact with David Chen. David was a legend in the architectural world, a semi-retired visionary who had shifted his focus from building monuments of commerce to creating sustainable communities. He had been Liam's professor and mentor, the one who had gifted him the small plastic scale ruler all those years ago. When Liam had called him, not to complain or ask for pity, but to discuss a specific problem with a load-bearing wall made from a new composite material, David had listened patiently for an hour. "They took the house, David," Liam had said finally, his voice quiet. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "A house is a box, Liam," David replied, his voice raspy but kind. "You design city blocks. You design new ways for people to live. Don't let them convince you that your world is as small as the box they put you in. Now, about this composite, did you account for thermal expansion in a high humidity environment? Their conversations became a lifeline. David never offered sympathy. He offered challenges. He pushed Liam's designs, poked holes in his theories, and forced him to refine his vision until it was not just beautiful, but practical, bulletproof. What Chloe never understood was that Liam's network wasn't built on cocktail party pleasantries. It was forged in late-night study sessions, collaborative projects, and a shared, fierce belief in the power of design to change the world. It was a currency of respect and intellectual rigor, a currency Chloe and her family had no way of valuing. One afternoon, about 4 months after the divorce, Liam was in the local grocery store. It was a brightly lit, cavernous place, a far cry from the boutique organic markets Chloe frequented. He was wearing jeans and an old university sweatshirt, his basket holding a modest collection of items: pasta, a block of cheese, some fresh vegetables, a loaf of bread. He was examining a carton of eggs when he heard a voice that was like ice down his spine. "Well, well, look what we have here." He turned slowly. Chloe stood there, looking radiant and utterly out of place. She wore a cream-colored cashmere coat that probably cost more than his month's rent, and her arm was linked with a tall, handsome man with slick-back hair and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. This was Marcus Thorne, a junior partner at her father's investment firm, the man she had been seeing even before the divorce was final. His suit was razor-sharp. His shoes gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Their shopping cart was a cornucopia of luxury: imported cheeses, a bottle of champagne, artisanal crackers, exotic fruits. "Liam," Chloe said, her tone a perfect blend of feigned surprise and genuine condescension. "I almost didn't recognize you. You're looking comfortable." The word was meant as an insult, a commentary on his clothes, his surroundings, his very existence. Marcus smirked, his eyes flicking over Liam's simple groceries. "Tough times, old sport?" he asked, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Liam met his gaze and offered a small, polite smile. "Hello, Chloe." Marcus. He didn't feel anger. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching a scene from a poorly written play. These people, with their shallow obsessions and their performative wealth, felt like relics from another lifetime. "We were just on our way back from the architect's office," Chloe announced, her voice a little too loud. "For the new house. You know, the plot of land out by the reservoir? We finally closed on it." She paused, letting the information land. She knew that plot of land had been Liam's dream. He had spent months creating a design for it, a beautiful, eco-conscious home that harmonized with the natural landscape. "We're building something truly spectacular," Marcus chimed in, puffing out his chest. "Glass walls, infinity pool, a 6-car garage. Our architect says it's going to be the talk of the town, nothing but the best." "Of course," Chloe added, her eyes gleaming with malice. "It's a design for people who know what they want. Decisive, bold, not some theoretical fantasy." It was a direct attack, a twisting of the knife. She wanted a reaction. She wanted to see him flinch, to see the pain of his stolen dream in his eyes. She wanted confirmation that she had broken him. Liam simply nodded, his expression unreadable. "That sounds wonderful for you both. I'm sure it will be very impressive." He shifted his simple basket in his arm. In his pocket, his fingers found the familiar edges of his scale ruler. He thought of the intricate, revolutionary designs on his computer back in his tiny apartment. He thought of his last conversation with David Chen, discussing the final funding stages for a project that would dwarf any single luxury home into insignificance. He looked at the two of them, so proud, so confident in their small, shiny world. They were celebrating a house. He was redesigning a city. The sheer scale of the dramatic irony was almost overwhelming. "Well," he said, his voice calm and steady, "I should let you get back to your shopping. It was good to see you." He turned and walked away, heading towards the checkout aisle, leaving them standing there amidst the pyramids of produce. Chloe stared after him, a frown creasing her perfect brow. His calm was infuriating. It was like throwing a stone into a deep well and hearing no splash. She had expected anger, jealousy, regret. She had received polite indifference. "What a pathetic little man," Marcus scoffed, squeezing her arm. "Living on pasta and cheese. You certainly traded up, my love." Chloe forced a smile. "Of course I did." But as she watched Liam's back recede, a tiny, unwelcome seed of doubt began to sprout in the back of her mind. He hadn't looked defeated. He had looked patient, as if he were simply waiting for something. She shook her head, dismissing the thought. He was nothing, a ghost from her past. She turned her attention back to the champagne and the life she had chosen, a life of glittering surfaces and beautiful things. She was completely, blissfully unaware of the tectonic plates of power shifting silently deep beneath her feet. The months that followed the grocery store encounter solidified into a year, and then two. For Chloe and Marcus, life was a triumphant procession of acquisitions and social victories. The house by the reservoir was completed, a monument of glass and steel that was indeed the talk of the town. It was featured in a glossy local design magazine with a gushing article that praised Marcus's bold vision and Chloe's impeccable taste. There was no mention of the architect who had originally dreamed of building on that land. Liam's name and his memory had been completely erased from their history, relegated to the status of a regrettable first draft. They hosted lavish parties where the city's elite mingled on terraces overlooking the water. Marcus, buoyed by his marriage into the Vance family and his own aggressive ambition, was climbing the ranks at his firm with astonishing speed. Chloe, for her part, had found her calling. She did not work in any traditional sense. Her job was the full-time curation of their perfect life. She managed their social calendar, oversaw the decoration of their homes. They had recently acquired a ski chalet in Aspen and chaired charity galas. She was powerful in the way only those who have never had to earn their own money can be. Her power was reflective, derived from her father, her husband, her assets. She was a mirror, polished to a brilliant shine, reflecting the success of the men around her. Occasionally, Liam's name would come up, usually as a punchline. Marcus, in particular, seemed to take a special pleasure in it. "Remember Chloe's first husband?" he'd say to a group of laughing friends over brandy. "The artist? Thought he could build cities out of bamboo and good intentions. Last I heard, he was designing sheds for a living." The stories grew more embellished with each telling, painting Liam as a tragic, deluded figure, a cautionary tale against dreaming too big without the backing of real money. Chloe would laugh along, the sound a little too sharp, a little too brittle. The image of Liam's calm face in the grocery store still surfaced in her mind at odd moments, a discordant note in the symphony of her success. Meanwhile, in his small apartment, Liam was oblivious to his role as a society anecdote. His world was not one of parties and appearances, but of relentless, focused work. The project, codenamed Helios, had grown from a collection of sketches and theories into a fully fledged, multi-billion-dollar urban development proposal. It was an audacious plan to revitalize a derelict industrial district on the city's waterfront, transforming it into a self-sustaining community with residential towers, commercial space, public parks, and an innovative energy infrastructure. David Chen had done more than just mentor Liam. He had become his partner. Using his considerable influence and connections, David had assembled a quiet consortium of international investors who were tired of the old models of development. They were looking for something new, something with a conscience that was also wildly profitable in the long term. Liam's designs, which Chloe had dismissed as utopian nonsense, were exactly what they wanted. He was not a hired architect. David had structured the deal to make Liam a principal partner. His intellectual property, the years of research and design he had poured into his work, was his primary investment. He was not just building someone else's vision, he was building his own. He worked grueling hours, coordinating with engineering teams in Germany, materials suppliers in Japan, and environmental consultants in Scandinavia. His small apartment had become the command center for a global operation. He lived frugally, not because he was destitute, but because his focus was absolute. Every dollar he earned from the small freelance projects he took on to cover his bills was secondary to the real work. He had no time for luxuries, no interest in the trappings of wealth. His satisfaction came from solving a complex structural equation or refining a public space to encourage community interaction. He was a builder, and he was building something magnificent, even if no one could see it yet. Then came the invitation. It was for the annual gala of the Vance Foundation, the charitable arm of Chloe's father's corporate empire. It was the social event of the season, a night where the city's wealthiest and most powerful gathered to celebrate their own generosity. Chloe herself was the chair of the event committee. Liam received the invitation not at his apartment, but through a contact at one of the catering companies he occasionally did freelance drafting for. The company was working the event, and they were short-staffed. It was an offer for a night's work as a waiter. For a moment, Liam considered declining. The thought of being in the same room as Chloe and her family, in such a diminished capacity, was deeply unappealing. But then another thought occurred to him. He knew that Richard Sterling, the notoriously reclusive construction magnate, was rumored to be attending. Sterling's company was one of the few with the capacity to handle a project of Helios' scale. He had been impossible to get a meeting with, protected by layers of gatekeepers. But at the gala, he would be a guest. He would be accessible. The irony was not lost on Liam. To get a meeting with one of the most powerful builders in the world, he would have to pretend to be a server at his ex-wife's party. It was a humiliation, but it was also an opportunity. Patience, David Chen had always told him. The best architects know how to wait for the right moment to place the keystone. And so, on a crisp autumn evening, Liam found himself putting on a stiff white shirt and a black bow tie, the uniform of the invisible. He arrived via the service entrance of the grand ballroom, a place he had once attended as a guest, his arm linked with Chloe's. The memory felt like a lifetime ago. The ballroom was a sea of glittering diamonds and black tuxedos. Champagne flowed like water. From his position near the edge of the room, Liam watched Chloe move through the crowd. She was in her element, a queen in her court. She wore a stunning, backless red gown, her laughter echoing as she greeted guests. She looked beautiful, powerful, and utterly untouchable. For 2 hours, Liam did his job. He refilled glasses, offered canapes, and moved silently through the throng. Most people didn't even see him. He was part of the scenery. He located Richard Sterling, a formidable-looking man with a mane of white hair, holding court near the orchestra. Liam knew he had to bide his time, to wait for the right moment. Then, the moment found him. A hush fell over the room as Chloe took the stage to give her welcoming speech. As she began to speak, one of her friends, a woman named Tiffany, gestured impatiently for a drink. The nearest server was Liam. "You there," Tiffany called out, snapping her fingers. "Champagne!" Liam picked up a bottle and a clean flute from his tray and moved toward her. As he approached the table, Chloe's voice from the stage washed over him. "And I want to thank my incredible husband, Marcus," she said, beaming. "A man who shows me every day what true strength and vision look like." As Liam reached the table, Tiffany looked up and her eyes widened in malicious recognition. "Oh my God," she whispered to the others at the table. "Chloe, you are not going to believe this." Chloe was just finishing her speech. As applause filled the room, she made her way toward her friends, her face flushed with triumph. "What is it?" she asked, smiling. Tiffany pointed. "Look who's pouring the drinks." Chloe's eyes followed her friend's finger, and her smile froze on her face. There was Liam, holding a bottle of champagne, his expression calm, his posture professional. For a moment, the world seemed to slow down. The noise of the party faded into a dull roar. All she could see was him, the ghost from her past, serving her friends at her moment of ultimate triumph. A cruel, triumphant smile spread across her face. The last nagging doubt about him vanished, replaced by a surge of vindictive satisfaction. She had been right all along. He was a failure. This was the proof. This was the final, perfect humiliation. "Liam," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. "What a surprise. I didn't know you were in the service industry now. It's so good to see you finding your level." The group chuckled. Marcus stepped forward, clapping Liam on the shoulder with patronizing familiarity. "Good to see you staying busy, old sport. Gotta pay the bills, right?" Liam didn't flinch. He simply finished pouring the champagne, his hand perfectly steady. He placed the glass on the table in front of Tiffany. He looked directly at Chloe, his blue eyes holding hers. He didn't look embarrassed or ashamed. He looked like a scientist observing a predictable chemical reaction. "I go where the work is, Chloe," he said, his voice quiet but carrying. He then turned his head slightly, his gaze moving past them to where Richard Sterling was standing alone for a moment, looking bored. This was his chance. "If you'll excuse me," Liam said, giving a polite nod to the stunned group. He walked away from their table, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. They expected him to retreat to the kitchens in shame. Instead, he walked with calm purpose directly toward Richard Sterling. Chloe watched, confused, as Liam approached the formidable magnate. She saw him say something. Sterling looked annoyed at first, then intrigued. Liam reached into his pocket and pulled out not a notepad, but a smartphone. He showed something on the screen to Sterling. The magnate leaned in, his eyes widening. He took the phone, swiping through the images. He started nodding, then talking animatedly. He handed the phone back, clapped Liam on the shoulder, a gesture of genuine respect, not patronage, and handed him his business card. Chloe stood frozen, the champagne flute in her hand, forgotten. The triumphant laughter had died in her throat. What had just happened? What could Liam possibly have shown Richard Sterling that would command that kind of attention? Her perfectly constructed world, which had felt so solid just moments before, suddenly had a hairline crack running through it. The image of Liam, the waiter, was already being replaced by the image of Liam, the man who could capture the attention of a titan of industry with a few words in a phone. The humiliation she had tried to orchestrate had backfired in a way she couldn't comprehend. The quiet man she had dismissed was still full of secrets, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt a genuine, chilling spike of fear. The week after the gala was a strange one for Chloe. The triumphant high she should have been riding felt hollow, persistently undermined by the memory of that bizarre encounter. She replayed it in her mind, trying to make sense of it. Liam, in a waiter's uniform, confidently approaching Richard Sterling. Sterling's shift from annoyance to rapt attention. The business card. It was a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit her understanding of the world. She had tried to ask Marcus about it, but he had brushed it off with a laugh. "He probably offered to wash the guy's car," Marcus had sneered. "Sterling was just being polite." "You're overthinking it, Chloe. The man is a nobody. You saw him. He was serving you canapes." She allowed herself to be convinced, mostly. It was easier to believe Marcus's version of events, a version that kept her world stable and her choices validated. She threw herself back into her life with a renewed fervor, planning a winter trip to their Aspen chalet, attending luncheons and shopping. She bought a new painting for the grand entryway of their house, a chaotic, abstract splash of reds and blacks that Marcus declared powerful. To Chloe, it just looked angry, but it was expensive, and that was the point. Life continued its glossy, predictable rhythm. Autumn deepened into winter. The city was decorated for the holidays. And then, one Tuesday morning, the world broke. Chloe was at her favorite cafe, the one with the oversized velvet chairs and the artisanal pastries. It was her post-Pilates ritual. She was scrolling through a fashion blog on her tablet, a half-finished latte at her elbow, when her phone began to buzz incessantly. It was her mother. Chloe ignored it. Eleanor often called at this time to coordinate some social obligation or pass on some piece of society gossip. She'd call back later. Then a text from Tiffany came through. All it said was, "OMG, have you seen it?" Another text from another friend. "Chloe, call me, now." Her phone buzzed again. Her father. That was unusual. He rarely called her during the workday unless it was an emergency. A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. She answered, her voice bright and forced. "Dad? Is everything okay?" "Turn on the financial news, Chloe," was all he said, his voice grim. "Or better yet, go to a newsstand." He hung up. A sense of dread, cold and sharp, pierced through her carefully maintained composure. She fumbled with her tablet, her fingers suddenly clumsy, and navigated to a major news website. The headline was at the top of the page, a banner splashed across a picture of the city's skyline. Helios Consortium unveils City of the Future, a $4.5 billion waterfront development set to redefine urban living. Her eyes scanned the article, her heart beginning to pound against her ribs. The revolutionary project, years in the making, is backed by a powerhouse group of international investors assembled by the legendary David Chen. The project promises to be a new global benchmark for sustainable architecture, a zero-carbon footprint, integrated green corridors. The words were just jargon to her. She kept scanning, looking for the part that had made her father call, that had set her friends' phones buzzing. And then she found it. The visionary behind the entire project, the lead architect and principal partner in the newly formed Helios Design Group, is a name previously unknown to many, but one poised to become a giant in the field. Liam Sterling. The name seemed to leap off the screen. Liam Sterling, not a consultant, not a hired draftsman, the lead architect, the principal partner, the visionary. The article was accompanied by a professional headshot. It was the same one she would later see on the cover of Forbes, the one with the confident eyes and the unnerving calm. The article continued, quoting David Chen. Liam is a once-in-a-generation talent. People were too busy looking at the surface, at the old metrics of success. They couldn't see the work he was doing, the foundation he was laying. This isn't an overnight success. This is the culmination of a decade of relentless, brilliant work. We didn't hire him, we partnered with him. Helios was his vision. We're just helping him build it. Chloe felt the blood drain from her face. The cafe around her, the smell of coffee, the low murmur of conversation, it all faded away. She read on, her horror mounting. The article mentioned the construction contract, the largest in the city's history. After a competitive bidding process, the contract has been awarded to Sterling Construction, led by CEO Richard Sterling, no relation. Richard Sterling, the man at the party. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. Liam hadn't been asking to wash his car. He had been pitching his multi-billion-dollar project. He hadn't been a waiter crashing a party. He had been a titan in disguise, using the service entrance as a strategic backdoor. The humiliation she had engineered for him was, in fact, his masterstroke, the moment he had secured the final piece of his empire. Her hands were shaking. She shoved her tablet into her bag and stumbled out of the cafe, leaving her latte unfinished. She walked blindly, her mind reeling. She ended up in front of a newsstand, the same one where she would later see the Forbes cover. Today, the major papers all had the story on the front page. There was his face again. And again. Liam. Liam Sterling, the quiet architect. She finally called her mother back. Eleanor's voice was strained, a mixture of fury and disbelief. "Did you know?" she demanded. "Did you have any idea?" "No," Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible. He was... He lived in a tiny apartment. He was serving drinks at the gala." "How is this possible?" "Possible?" Eleanor's voice was shrill. "Chloe, this is a catastrophe. Do you understand what you've done? You divorced the most brilliant architect of his generation for Marcus, a glorified stockbroker who is now utterly insignificant. Your father is apoplectic. This project is going to reshape the entire city's economy. And the man behind it all is the one you threw away like garbage." The words hit Chloe with the force of a physical impact. Threw away like garbage. It was true. She had seen him as disposable, a stepping stone she had used and discarded. She had measured him by the size of his bank account and the brand of his car, and she had found him wanting. She had been so blind, so profoundly, arrogantly blind. She hung up on her mother and leaned against the cold brick wall of a building, the city's sounds a chaotic roar in her ears. She thought of his calm face in the law office. You can't take anything that truly matters. She thought of his polite indifference in the grocery store. She thought of his steady hand as he poured her champagne, his eyes holding hers without a trace of shame. He had known. All along he had known this was coming. He had been patient. He had let her play out her petty dramas, let her believe she was the winner. He had endured the humiliation, the condescension, the insults, all while he was quietly building a new world, a world in which he was king. And she was the court jester, laughing at his shabby clothes while he sat on a hidden throne. The full, crushing weight of her mistake settled upon her. It wasn't just about the money, though the sheer scale of it made her dizzy. It was about the status, the power, the narrative. He had rewritten their entire story. In the new version, she wasn't the triumphant woman who had traded up. She was the fool who had traded a diamond for a piece of glass. The shame was so intense it was nauseating. Her perfect life, the one she had curated with such ruthless precision, had just been revealed as a colossal, historic blunder. And the worst part? She had no one to blame but herself. The revelation of Liam's success sent shockwaves through Chloe's life, cracking the very foundations of her identity. The first casualty was her marriage. Marcus, the man she had believed to be the embodiment of true strength and vision, revealed his true nature with breathtaking speed. His initial reaction to the news was disbelief, followed by a frantic, grasping jealousy. "It's a fluke," he insisted, pacing their cavernous living room, the one with the powerful, abstract painting. "A bubble. This sustainability nonsense is a fad. It'll crash and burn." But as the days went on and the financial world buzzed with nothing but the Helios project, his denial curdled into a resentful, desperate ambition. The man he had mocked as a pathetic little man was now the most talked about person in their circle, and Marcus couldn't stand it. His own success, which had seemed so impressive, was now dwarfed, rendered provincial by comparison. His attitude toward Chloe shifted subtly at first, then dramatically. The affectionate condescension he had always shown her soured. Her primary value to him had been her connection to the Vance family's wealth and status. But now, that status was eclipsed by the man she had divorced. She was no longer a prize. She was a liability, a walking symbol of a monumental miscalculation. "How could you not know?" he'd demand late at night, his voice laced with accusation. "You lived with him for 5 years. How could you be so blind?" "How could I know?" she would shoot back, her voice tight with panic. "He was drawing pictures in a notebook and talking about saving the planet. You laughed at him with me." "I laughed because you told me he was a failure," Marcus roared. "I took your word for it. You were his wife." Their beautiful home, once a stage for their social triumphs, became a battlefield. The arguments were bitter and circular, always ending with the same unbearable truth. They had underestimated Liam, and in doing so, had diminished themselves. Chloe's attempts to contact Liam were a study in futility. She called his old number, the one she still had saved in her phone under the contemptuous label, Liam, do not answer. It was disconnected. She drove to his old apartment building, the one she had never deigned to visit. She buzzed the unit, her heart pounding. A young student answered the intercom, telling her the previous tenant had moved out over a year ago. Finally, in a move of pure desperation, she went to the address listed for the new Helios Design Group. She had expected a modest office, perhaps a floor in an existing building. Instead, she found herself standing before a structure that took her breath away. It was a building unlike any she had ever seen. A sleek, 20-story tower of glass in shimmering metal, interwoven with vertical gardens that cascaded down its sides. It was elegant, innovative, and alive. It was, she realized with a jolt, a physical manifestation of the utopian nonsense she had once mocked. It was one of his designs, brought to life. The lobby was a cathedral of light and space. A mature oak tree grew in the center of the atrium, reaching up toward a vast skylight 3 stories above. The air smelled of damp earth and clean, filtered air, not the sterile chemical scent of the corporate buildings she knew. People moved through the space with a quiet, focused energy. There was no oppressive hierarchy, just a sense of shared purpose. She approached the receptionist, a young woman sitting behind a desk made of a single, massive piece of reclaimed wood. "I'm here to see Liam Sterling," Chloe said, trying to inject a confidence she did not feel. "I'm an old friend." The receptionist gave her a polite, professional smile. "Mr. Sterling is in a meeting. Do you have an appointment?" "No, but if you could just tell him Chloe Vance is here." She used her maiden name, a name that still carried weight in this city, or so she thought. The receptionist's smile didn't falter. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Sterling's schedule is fully committed for the next several weeks. You can leave a message." Weeks. The word was a slap in the face. She, Chloe Vance, was being told to wait weeks to see the man she had cast aside. The humiliation was a raw, physical ache. She was about to argue, to insist, when a voice from behind her cut through the air. "Chloe?" She turned. Liam was standing there, emerging from a glass-walled conference room. He was not alone. David Chen was by his side, and behind him, 2 other men in sharp suits who looked vaguely familiar. She realized they were the investors who had been pictured with him in the news. Liam was dressed in a simple but elegant dark sweater and gray trousers, a stark contrast to Marcus's flashy, brand-conscious suits. He looked centered, grounded, as if he were the load-bearing column around which this entire, incredible structure was built. "Liam," she breathed, relief and anxiety warring within her. I had to see you, to congratulate you. It's all so incredible." He nodded slowly, his eyes giving nothing away. "Thank you, Chloe." "I was hoping we could talk," she said, lowering her voice, trying to create a bubble of intimacy in the vast open space. "For a few minutes, alone." He glanced at David Chen, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod before guiding the other men toward the elevators. The silent exchange spoke volumes. This was not a conversation between equals. Liam was in command, and his time was valuable. "You have 5 minutes," Liam said, his tone not unkind, but firm. He gestured toward a small seating area tucked away from the main thoroughfare, 2 minimalist chairs facing a low table. As they sat, Chloe's carefully prepared words deserted her. The sheer reality of his success, embodied by the building they were sitting in, was overwhelming. "I don't understand, Liam," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "How? When? All that time, you never said anything." "You never asked," he replied simply. "You told me what you thought. You told me my work was a fantasy. You told me I didn't understand how the world works. You weren't interested in a conversation. You were interested in a lecture. So I stopped talking and started working. The directness of his words stunned her. There was no anger, just an unvarnished statement of fact. But the divorce, you let me take everything. You walked away with nothing. A small, sad smile touched his lips. You think that was everything? Chloe, you took furniture. You took a house, a box made of wood and nails. You took numbers in a bank account. All of that is replaceable. It can be bought. He leaned forward slightly, his blue eyes intense. You didn't take my mind. You didn't take my vision. You didn't take my relationships with people like David, people who value ideas more than dividends. You took the decorations. You left the foundation. He was using architectural metaphors, his native language. She was beginning to understand. She had seen their life as a finished, decorated room. He had seen it as a blueprint, a structural plan. I made a mistake, Liam, she whispered, the confession tasting like ash in her mouth. A terrible, terrible mistake. She looked at him, her eyes pleading. Is there any? Can we start over? Not, not like before, but as friends? I could help you. My family, my connections. It was a desperate, pathetic gamble, and they both knew it. She was offering him the very things he had just transcended. She was offering him a key to a door he now owned. Liam sat back, and the sadness in his eyes deepened. He wasn't looking at her with triumph, but with something that felt infinitely worse. Pity. Help me? He repeated softly. Chloe, the people you know are the ones who are now trying to get a meeting with me. The world you thought was the only one that mattered is now trying to get into this one. He gestured around the magnificent lobby. This is how the world works, Chloe. It's not about who your father is or what party you attend. It's about what you can build, what you can create that has value. You told me I was a dreamer. You were right. But you thought that was a weakness. It was my greatest strength. He stood up, the 5 minutes clearly over. I have to get back to my meeting. She stood as well, her legs unsteady. Liam, wait. What about us? The question hung in the air, a ghost of the past. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of the old pain in his eyes, an echo of the man he had been. There is no us, Chloe, he said, his voice gentle but absolute. You burned that bridge. You bulldozed the site. There's nothing left to build on. He turned and walked away, his figure receding into the vast, light-filled space he had created. Chloe stood alone in the lobby of his empire, a ghost in his new world. The finality of his words was like a locked door, and she was on the outside, in the cold. The true consequence of her actions was finally clear. It wasn't just that she had lost a fortune. It was that she had willingly, arrogantly, thrown away the love of a man who could build worlds. And she was now left with nothing but the empty, echoing shell of the one she had prized so highly. The aftermath of Chloe's visit to the Helios headquarters was swift and brutal. When she returned home, the house felt different. No longer a fortress of success, but a gilded cage, cold and silent. Marcus was there, waiting for her. He had a packed suitcase standing by the door. Where were you? He demanded, his face a mask of cold fury. I went to see him, Chloe said, her voice hollow. Marcus let out a short, sharp laugh devoid of any humor. You went to beg. I can just imagine it. Pathetic. He picked up his suitcase. I'm leaving, Chloe. Leaving? The words seemed foreign. People didn't leave her. She was the one who left. What are you talking about? Where are you going? I'm going to salvage what's left of my career, he said, his voice dripping with contempt. This whole situation with your ex-husband, it's made us a laughingstock. Me, by association with you. You, for being the biggest fool in this city's history. He walked closer, his eyes hard and cruel. Our entire marriage was based on a premise, Chloe. The premise was that we were on the winning team, that by combining my ambition with your family's status, we would be unstoppable. He gestured around the opulent room. But it turns out you weren't on the winning team. You were married to the real winner, and you were too blind to see it. You didn't trade up. You cashed in your lottery ticket for a handful of magic beans. And I was stupid enough to buy into your story. The cruelty of his words was breathtaking. He was recasting their entire relationship as a failed business merger, and she was the bad investment he was now writing off. "So that's it?" she asked, a hysterical laugh bubbling in her throat. "You're just walking out?" "I have a reputation to think of," he said coolly. "Staying with you now, it's bad for the brand." He paused at the door. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours. Considering the circumstances and the fact that most of this," he waved a hand at the house and its contents, "was financed through debt leveraged against my projected future earnings with your father's firm, I think you'll find the terms surprising." He smiled that cold, empty smile one last time. "Goodbye, Chloe. I wish you the life you deserve." He used Liam's exact words. The phrase, once a quiet prophecy, was now a biting, explicit curse. The heavy front door clicked shut behind him, the sound echoing the finality of Liam's words in the lobby. There's nothing left to build on. Within a week, the true meaning of Marcus's parting shot became clear. The lawyers descended, and the carefully constructed financial house of cards that was their life came tumbling down. Marcus, it turned out, was a man who lived on leverage. The house, the cars, the Aspen chalet, they were all heavily mortgaged, secured not by existing wealth, but by the promise of future success within the Vance empire. A success that was now in jeopardy. Chloe's father, furious and embarrassed by the Liam Sterling situation, had made it clear that Marcus's star was no longer on the rise. Seeing the writing on the wall, Marcus had cut his losses, and his legal team was now ruthlessly ensuring that the mountain of debt they had accumulated fell squarely on Chloe's shoulders. Her mother, Eleanor, was no help. Her sympathy was non-existent, replaced by a cold, constant refrain of, "I told you so." "I warned you about that architect from the beginning," she'd say over the phone, "but you wouldn't listen. And then you leave him, which was the only smart thing you ever did, only to find out he's a secret genius, and you do it for a charlatan like Marcus. You've made a mess of everything, Chloe, an absolute mess. Your father can barely look at you." The social invitations, once the lifeblood of her existence, dried up. Her friends, who had laughed with her at Liam's expense, now spoke of her in hushed, pitying tones. She was no longer a success story. She was a cautionary tale, the woman who had it all and threw it away. The moral mirror that Liam had so quietly held up to her was now being held by the entire world, and the reflection was unbearable. The ultimate blow came a few months later. Forced to sell the house on Crescent Drive to cover the debts Marcus had left her with, Chloe watched with a sense of numb horror as a new owner was announced. The buyer was not a family, but a corporation. The Helios Design Group. A short press release stated that the property would be converted into the David Chen Fellowship House, a residence for promising young architects from around the world who were invited to study and work with Liam Sterling. Her home, the symbol of her victory over Liam, was now set to become a part of his legacy, a place where he would nurture the next generation of visionaries. The poetic justice was so perfect, so complete, it felt like a meticulously crafted punishment. He had taken the very stage of her triumph and rededicated it as a temple to the ideals she had mocked. One afternoon, broken in a drift, Chloe found herself driving through the old industrial district, the area where the Helios project was beginning to take shape. The derelict warehouses and abandoned factories she remembered were gone, replaced by a vast, sprawling construction site. Cranes, hundreds of them, dotted the skyline like a metallic forest, their movements slow and deliberate. It was the very scene Liam used to watch from the law firm window, but magnified 1,000 times. She parked her car, a modest sedan, a loan from her parents after her own luxury vehicle had been repossessed, and got out. She stood behind a chain-link fence, watching the birth of his city. It was more than just a construction site. It was a vision taking physical form. She could see the outlines of the green corridors, the foundations of the towers that seemed to reach for the clouds, the vast spaces that would become parks in public squares. She thought of the small, beautiful drawings he used to make, the ones she had dismissed as fantasies. They weren't fantasies, they were blueprints. He hadn't been lost in a dream. He had been looking at the future, a future she was too nearsighted to see. A car pulled up near hers, a sleek, black electric sedan, silent and understated. The back door opened and Liam stepped out, accompanied by David Chen and Richard Sterling. They were there to survey the progress. Liam was holding a set of rolled-up blueprints, and he was pointing toward the foundation of the central tower, explaining something with animated, passionate gestures. He was in his element, a creator on his canvas. He was happy. Not the giddy, fragile happiness she had pursued, but a deep, solid contentment that came from meaningful work, from building something that would outlast him. He hadn't seen her. She was just another anonymous figure standing by the fence. She watched him for a long time, this man she thought she knew, this stranger who had reshaped her world by simply staying true to his own. The anger and the shame she had been carrying for months began to recede, replaced by a profound, aching sense of loss. Not for the money or the status, but for the man himself, for the partnership she had failed to understand, for the vision she had been unable to share. She finally understood his last words to her in the lobby. There's nothing left to build on. She had spent years demolishing their foundation, carting away the materials, poisoning the ground with her arrogance and contempt. And now, standing at the edge of the magnificent city he was raising from the dust, she was left with nothing but the rubble of her own making. For the first time, with no one to blame and nowhere to hide, Chloe Vance began to weep. A year passed. The skyline of the city continued to transform, the skeletal frames of the Helios towers fleshing out with glass and steel, becoming a new, dominant feature of the landscape. The project was a global phenomenon, studied by city planners and architects worldwide. Liam Sterling was no longer just a name on a magazine cover. He was a force, a thought leader whose lectures were standing-room-only events, and whose firm was inundated with the most talented young designers on the planet. Liam himself remained largely unchanged by the fame and fortune. He was still the calm, focused man he had always been, more comfortable in a design studio with his team than at a black-tie gala. The wealth to him was simply a tool, the fuel that allowed him to build, to innovate, to push the boundaries of what was possible. He moved out of his small apartment, but not into a sprawling mansion like the one Chloe had prized. He took up residence in a modest penthouse apartment atop one of the first completed residential buildings in the Helios complex, a space he had designed himself. It was beautiful, not because it was opulent, but because it was intelligent. Every detail was considered, from the way the light moved through the rooms during the day to the recycled materials used in its construction. His home was a living example of his philosophy. He rarely thought of Chloe. When he did, it was not with anger or triumph, but with a distant, quiet sadness. She was a chapter of his life that was over, a painful but necessary part of the journey that had led him here. He had learned from it. He had learned that true strength wasn't about projecting power, but about having the integrity to hold on to your vision when no one else can see it. He had learned that forgiveness wasn't about absolving the other person, but about releasing himself from the weight of their judgment. He poured his energy into his work and into his people. The David Chen Fellowship House, his former home, was thriving. It was filled with the bright, eager energy of young architects who saw Liam not as a billionaire, but as a mentor who would spend hours with them, poring over their designs, challenging them, encouraging them, just as David Chen had once done for him. He was building more than just a city. He was building a legacy of creativity and purpose. One evening, he was walking through one of the newly opened public parks in the Helios district. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the innovative bioswales and gardens that were already flourishing. Families were strolling, children were playing on a sculpture that doubled as a playground, and couples were sitting on benches, enjoying the quiet end of the day. This was the part of the project that gave him the most satisfaction, not the soaring towers, but the human-scale spaces where life happened. He saw a woman sitting alone on a bench, sketching in a small notebook. There was something familiar about her posture, the focused line of her shoulders. As he drew closer, his breath caught. It was Chloe. She looked profoundly different. The expensive, trend-conscious clothes were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. Her hair wasn't perfectly styled. It was pulled back in a simple ponytail. The mask of makeup she had always worn was gone, and for the first time in years, he could see the faint lines of fatigue and experience around her eyes. She wasn't looking at him. Her attention was entirely on the page in front of her. He was about to turn and walk away, to leave her in peace, but curiosity got the better of him. He altered his path slightly, walking on the grass behind her bench, giving him a fleeting glimpse of what she was drawing. He expected a doodle, a random sketch, but it wasn't. It was a remarkably detailed and sensitive drawing of the park around them. She had captured the way the light hit the leaves of a particular tree, the posture of an elderly man reading a newspaper, the fluid lines of the bench she was sitting on. It was good. More than good, it was observant. It had feeling. He remembered, from a time long ago, that she had been an art history major in college. She had loved to draw then, but had given it up, calling it an impractical hobby. Her mother had encouraged her to focus on more useful pursuits, like cultivating social connections. He stood there for a moment, hidden by the deepening twilight, watching her. She was completely absorbed, lost in the act of creation, in the simple, quiet joy of observing the world and translating it onto a page. She looked more at peace than he had ever seen her, even in the height of her supposed triumphs. The brittle, performative shell was gone. What was left was something quieter, more authentic. He walked away without a word, a complex mix of emotions swirling within him. His victory had never been about her defeat. He had never wished her ill. He had only wished for her the life she deserved. And maybe, just maybe, this was it. Not a life of luxury and status, but a simpler, quieter life, where she could finally reconnect with the part of herself she had abandoned long ago. Perhaps her fall from the world she had worshipped had allowed her to land in a place that was, for the first time, real. Liam continued his walk, a sense of resolution settling over him. The great, dramatic arc of revenge and vindication was over. The anger had faded, the humiliation had been redeemed. What was left was not a feeling of triumph, but one of quiet wisdom. He had learned that you cannot control how others see you or what they value. You can only control your own work, your own integrity, your own vision. True worth isn't something that is given to you by the world. It's something you build, quietly, patiently, from the ground up, until it is so solid and so real that it creates its own gravity, and the world has no choice but to orbit around it. He reached the edge of the park and looked back at the city he had built, its lights beginning to twinkle against the indigo sky. It was beautiful. It was his, and he was finally at peace. And so, we come to the end of Liam and Chloe's story. It's a powerful reminder that the world's definition of success, the flashy cars, the big houses, the social status, is often just a glittering facade. True worth, the kind that endures, is built on a foundation of integrity, patience, and unwavering belief in your own vision. Liam won, not by becoming cruel or vindictive, but by simply outbuilding the world that had cast him aside. He focused on his foundation, and in the end, his structure was the one left standing. What do you think is the most important lesson from this story? Is it about the danger of underestimating others or the power of staying true to yourself? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Your insights are what make this community so special. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like to let me know. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next story we share together. Until next time, remember to value the foundation, not just the facade.